Okay, so it's Thursday, August 24th. Your Seattle Mariners, 2023, just in case you were curious to hear too. Hey, these are going to last forever. Mariners aren't playing today. Currently watching Minnesota and Texas play a fun baseball game. Go Twins. Like the Rangers, but Mariners have some stuff going on. But I thought today would be a good day to do a couple things. One, record something because I'm just having a blast recording these videos. Two, um, get a chance to push for that 1,000 subscribers and give away a really cool thing. So make sure you watch this video till the very end because I'm going to give you a chance to win something phenomenal. I honestly can't believe I'm doing this, but I want to reach that 1,000 so bad. And I want to also thank everybody for the support that they've shown. So we're going to do the top 10 Seattle Mariner outfielders of all time. Here's the caveat. No current Mariners. So sorry, Cade Marlowe doesn't make it. No, but obviously the big thing here is Julio. And Julio's already a top 5 Seattle Mariner outfielder. And some of that, I've got to be honest with you, is a little bit darning with faint praise because I was excited for this one because the top half is so fun, especially the top 2. And I was looking through, it's not great. And that shouldn't surprise me. I root for a baseball team that has never been to the World Series, has never even been a win away from a World Series. Of course, it's not great. Like, there's star power at the top of a lot of these lists, but it's pretty. A lot of teams would be embarrassed is too strong of a word, but a lot of teams would be not so enamored with the top 10 list that the Seattle Mariners have. I'll give you some names that I considered. Stan Javier. I mean, that's where we're at, folks. Stan Javier was more of a fourth outfielder, but was there during a really good time. Solid player, solid defensive player, provided a lot of versatility, was more of a regular than I think people realize. I mean, technically wasn't listed in like starting lineups to begin the year, but got a lot of playing time and was a pretty darn good player for them for a few years. Michael Saunders, he was there for a long time, longer than I think we remember. The fact he was even considered for this list tells you that there's some depth issues. And then Nelson Cruz. So if we were just calling him an outfielder, he's easily on this list. No questions asked. Top 5 on this list. One of the better offensive players in Seattle Mariner history. But he didn't play in the outfield enough for me to qualify him. He played 80 games, I believe, his first year and then 45 the next. He was mostly a DH here. And when we do a DH list, boy, I wonder who's going to be at the top of that one. When we do a DH list, we will go ahead and put him on that list for sure. I don't think he played enough in the outfield to qualify. You're going to listen to some of these names that I say and say, how the heck are you ranking them above Nelson Cruz, aka Boomstick Baby? There's my caveat. There's my qualifier. That is why I'm leaving Nelson Cruz off this list. All right, at number 10, I have Mark McLemore. By the way, it's going to make it look like I've done some edits with this thing. Now, I've just hit paused on my software so that I can load every player because having 20 windows open and writing a Tolstoy novel for the outfield position just didn't sound like a heck of a lot of fun. So McLemore played 4 years in Seattle, and you're going to look at the numbers and say, Chris, seriously? He hit 259, 360, 357. That's a 717 OPS, and that's a 93 OPS plus. Well, below average. But I think anybody who remembers Mark McLemore remembers how big he was for those 2001 and 2000, especially the 2001 and 2002 teams, two of the better Seattle Mariner teams of all time. Got on base at a 380 clip for both of those, provided stolen bases. He stole 39 bases in 2001 to 18 bases in 2002. Was extremely versatile. You could play him pretty much anywhere. Left field was a spot that he played an awful lot. Left field has been a bugaboo for the Seattle Mariners for a very long time. That's why one of the players on this list was pretty easy to put on there. Like, no, not great. Never had a superb year, but I think really underrated in terms of what he provided the Seattle Mariners with that versatility. Decent outfielder, not great, but decent enough. got on base, made things happen with his wheels, getting first to third an awful lot, stealing those bases, scoring runs, scored 117 in 2001 and 91 in 2002. He's probably best known for being the same name as the rapper, having that same last name. But Mark McLemore was a very solid player. Ideally, not number 10 on a list of a team's best outfielders, but he's number 10 on mine. All right, I mentioned that left field position, and that's why number 9 for me. And actually, he just deserves to be on there as well. Not exactly well remembered per se by Seattle Mariner fans, but I've got Randy Winn at number 9. In his 3 seasons in Seattle, he hit 287, 345, 417, 31 homers, stole 56 bases, played a good left field. I think what people best remember Randy Winn for is that there was the Lou Piniella trade. Lou Piniella goes to Tampa Bay with Antonio Perez. Mariners get Randy Winn. He never quite became the well above average player that I would think we were all hoping for, but he was a solid outfielder and went on to have a nice little career afterwards, had a couple nice seasons for the Giants, had a couple of really nice seasons for Tampa Bay as well. I mean, he was kind of a scapegoat, I think, a little bit for the Seattle Mariners because he just never took that step forward. And I think people were like, when is Randy Winn finally going to play like a star? Well, Randy Winn wasn't a star, but he was a solid outfielder who spent some time in center field, really good left fielder. Again, this is not ideal to have as your number 9 at the position, but he's justified. Like by WAR, he certainly is justified as being one of the top players on the Seattle Mariners outfield list. And again, darning with faint praise. There's no question about it. I really thought this was like going to be a loaded list. It's not, because a lot of guys just weren't here very long, or a lot of guys just weren't very good. But Randy Winn, you belong in the number 9 spot. Hope you're doing well. Okay, at number 8, I've got one of the, I think, the more underrated Seattle Mariners, and certainly one of the better players for the teams in the absolute doldrums, Phil Bradley. Phil Bradley was a really good player for the Seattle Mariners. In his, let's look here, 5 years with the Seattle Mariners, he hit 301, 382, 449, 52 homers, stole 107 bases, including 40 in 1987. Kind of famously traded for Mike Jackson, who ended up being a very good Seattle Mariner, maybe makes our list of best relievers of all time. But Phil Bradley was, and unfortunately for Phil Bradley, after the trade from Seattle, he was just never the same player. So I think the Mariners technically end up winning that trade. But Bradley was really good. 862 OPS in 1985. He was an all-star. 849 in 1986. 850 in 1987. Was a 2020 player, a couple of 1 year, 26 homers, 22 stolen bases. Power kind of dissipated after that. But Phil Bradley was a really solid player that probably would have gotten more attention if the Mariners weren't just an awful and unmemorable team in the early 80s. Like outside of Phil Bradley and Alvin Davis and then Mark Langston, there just was not a whole heck of a lot to write home about. But surprisingly, Phil Bradley, a pretty darn good player. Number 7, my main man, Franklin Gutierrez. This one's tough because you think about what could have been. And I don't have Goody's stats pulled up because, quite honestly, I don't need to look at Goody's stats to tell you what he was. As good of a defensive player as I've ever seen. Maybe the best defensive player I've ever seen. And Seattle, we have not been blessed with great baseball over the 40-plus years of being Seattle Mariner fans. One thing we have been blessed with is defense in center field. We'll get into a few other names that go ahead, and including Julio, who has been absolutely sensational in defense as well. I'll take Gutierrez at his peak above all of them. His ability to track the baseball, I've never seen anyone do it better. He had the athleticism as well. It's great. It's all fine and dandy to be able to get a read on the baseball, but if you don't have the athleticism to take advantage of it, it only can give you so much. Goody could track it with the best of them and go get it with the best of them too. He was special. He was special. Jack Zarincic, I think, was Probably disaster is closer to accurate than average, somewhere in between there. But that was a good trade. Getting Gutierrez in that JJ Putz deal, who, JJ Putz, phenomenal reliever for the Mariners for a couple of years. Getting that dude, that was unbelievable. And he showed some offensive upside too. He had some power, hit for some average. Unfortunately, injuries just sapped him, just completely sapped him. And he became basically a role player to end his career. Basically, a guy who was only playing against left-handers. It hurts a little bit. It hurts because if Gutierrez stays healthy, not a Hall of Famer, but maybe a Hall of Very Gooder. Maybe. That sucks. That sucks that injuries took away a good 5 years probably of that guy's career. Flawed offensive player, no question about it. Never really lived up to the hype of the first couple of years, or reached the highs of the first couple of years, I should say. But when he was at his best, man, there was a lot to be excited about for Goody. Also, if you asked my grandma and you asked a few other people, one of the more handsome Seattle Mariners of all time, for dang sure. Wilson's up there, and Goody is definitely up there for sure. I think most Seattle fans would agree with that one. Not. Maybe that's a list we'll do someday, but for now, we'll stay out of that one. But Franklin Gutierrez was just a special defensive player and showed enough offensive upside that he absolutely belongs on this. At number 6, we've got Mitch Haniger, the hit manager. 5 years with Seattle, and he hit. Still weird that he's not here, to be honest with you. 263, 337, 480, 107 homers, drove in 306 runs if you're into that sort of thing, stole 18 bases. Another one that you can't help but wonder what could have been if he could have stayed healthy, because 2017, he hits 282, 352, 491 with 16 homers. You start to see the makings of a star. And then in 2018, he literally is an all-star. 859 OPS, 26 homers, drives in 93 runs. 859 OPS is good for 139 OPS plus, well above average offensive player. Still was a strong defensive player at that point. And you're starting to think maybe this guy is like an actual build around type of offensive player. And then in 2019, he gets hurt. And he basically misses 2019 and 2020 while dealing with some horrific injury stuff. But he comes back in 2021 and he has an 804 OPS. He almost reaches 40 home runs, 39 homers. 2022, another injury-plagued season, and he leaves Seattle for free agency leaves Seattle in free agency for the Giants in 2023. Unfortunately, he's had another injury-plagued season. He's only been able to play more than 140 games twice in his career. And the fact that he's so high on this list, I think, tells you two things. One, that, again, the Seattle list is not great. And two, that at his peak, he was a phenomenal player. Phenomenal player. That trade is fascinating to look back on too. 6.5 win player, by the way, in 2018. 6.5 wins is not MVP level, but just on that notch below. It's a phenomenal season. And he has a couple 3-win seasons as well in between. There just aren't a lot of Mariners that have those type of years. In the outfield, especially. Well, in the infield too, to be honest. But Mitch Haniger was awesome. And I really hope he figures things out in San Francisco and he can stay healthy. I root for that guy so hard because I don't know if there's any player I can think of that has been more affected, I want to say a different word, by the salary system in baseball. I mean, he doesn't get his big payday until this year, and he doesn't get it. I believe Mitch Haniger is 32 now. Yeah, turned 32 in December. He'll be 33 this offseason. Because if he hits free agency in that 2018 range, you're talking about a monster contract. And he deserved a monster contract. But instead, he had to play the arbitration game, and that stinks. It's a stupid system. Hope someday we get rid of it. Don't think we ever will, but at least not while I'm alive, which, probably got another few years left, hopefully. Solid baseball player, but another one, him and Goody, where you just kind of go. Number 5, we've got Raul Ibanez. Just, you can compare him really to Mitch Haniger in terms of like offensive ability. Very similar. Better hit tool for Ibanez, a little more power, I guess, from Haniger at his best. I think we maybe forget how long Ibanez played for the Seattle Mariners. There were 11 seasons with the Seattle Mariners. And in those 11 seasons, he hit 279, 341, 466, 156 home runs, drove in 612 runs. And if he would have played for a team that wasn't so anemic offensively, he would have driven in a heck of a lot more runs than that. It is worth pointing out that Ibanez was here and from 96 to 2000, and to call him a bit player is quite the understatement. So that's 5 of those seasons, right? But when he comes back from the Royals and he goes to Kansas City and he becomes a very good player, from 2005 to 2008, he was the Seattle Mariner offense, with all due respect to some other guys. And Ichiro was there too. Spoiler alert, we might talk about him too. But Ibanez was unbelievably good in a few of those years. 869 OPS in 2006 with 33 homers, 123 RBI. 123 RBI for a bad offensive team is pretty impressive. 831 OPS in 2007. 837 OPS in 2008. He goes to the Phillies and he has some nice time, but we don't care about that. Does come back to Seattle and hits 29 homers, becomes the ultimate guess hitter where he's just hoping that he gets a fastball. Clearly had lost his bat speed at that point, but 29 homers is a solid season. 793 OPS is above average too at that time. Well above average, 123 OPS plus number. Never a great defensive player. And I think that hurts him on this list. And it's why even though he ranks very high in a lot of categories for the Seattle Mariners, he ranks a little lower, certainly below the big 4 that we're about to talk about. But he's in his own tier. You've got the big 4 that we're going to talk about. And there's tiers for there too, don't get me wrong. But he's not next. He and Haniger, I guess, could be in that same tier. But I'd put Ibanez pretty clearly above him, obviously, because I just did it. I literally did it. That is something that I literally did. Really solid player. I think people either underrate him or overrate him based on how you talk about him. But to me, he was a strong middle of the order hitter who played for some just gosh awful baseball teams, which is unfortunate. I'm glad he got to Philadelphia and got to have some success there. According to Baseball Reference, it says he played for the Angels. That's not true. There's no way that's true. Baseball Reference, stop lying to us. That didn't happen. But those years from basically 2001 to 2011, well above average offensive player, really good player. And most of those years with Seattle, some with Kansas City, 1 with Philadelphia, 3 with Philadelphia. Peace. But the time that Raul Ibanez was here, he's more than deserving of being a top 5 Seattle. All right. Here's where the controversy starts, maybe. At number 4, I have Jay Buhner. And there's at least a few of you who are screaming right now, how is this guy not in the top 3? And I totally get it. Because if you just look at the baseball card, and if you look at homers and RBIs, there's no doubt he belongs in that category. In 1995, this dude hits 40 homers in 126 games with a 909 OPS. In 1996, he has a 926 OPS with 44 homers. And folks, I know RBI, I keep talking about how flawed of a stat it is. I don't know why I have to keep repeating myself. I guess I just like the sound of my own voice. 138 RBI. And then in 1997, 40 home runs, 109 RBIs, 889 OPS. He had in 1994, by the way, too, in the shortened season, 936 OPS, best season by batting average, 279, 394, 542. There's no denying that Jay Buhner is one of the greatest hitters in Seattle Mariner history and well deserving of being in the Hall of Fame. The issue for me with Buhner, and the reason why he's not in the top three, is because defensively, he wasn't horrible. He was vastly overrated. Vastly overrated. Took advantage of not having to play exactly the most cavernous. Well, I mean, you had to play balls off the wall in the Kingdom, but you didn't have to have a whole heck of a lot of range. And you also had a guy playing next to you that made up for a lot of things too. Had a howitzer of an arm, one of the strongest throwing arms in Seattle Mariner history. Not quite as strong as number 2, but definitely up there. Tons of power, got on base, legitimately one of the greatest Seattle Mariners of all time. But there's a guy I got above him that some people will agree with and some will disagree. It's fine. It's fine. And in fact, here's the thing I want to do. And this is how I want to make sure people are actually watching these videos. I know you are, but you got to tell me. Is it Ichiro? Or excuse me, is it Buhner? Or is it Cameron? Who's better? And that's probably a spoiler alert for number 3. But who is it? You tell me in the comments. Is it Buhner or is it Cameron? And there'll be another thing you need to do as well. But you got to make sure and remember that. It feels wrong ranking him 4th because one of my favorite players as a kid, unbelievable statistics, unbelievable amount of huge hits for the Seattle Mariners. I will never forget 1995. Well, big shock. We're talking about 95, and we'll talk about 95 again, I'm sure. Not just in this video. His attitude about saying, bad word, the wild card, we're going for the division. I mean, that's the stuff of legends, man. It's just words, but he certainly backed it up. And here's the other thing about Buhner that I think we cannot forget. The number 1 outfielder on this list gets hurt. And when that number 1 outfielder gets hurt is when Buhner, I think, went on his best run. There was a time in that 95 season, he was good again. 96 was really good. 97 was really good. And 94, obviously, too. But there was a time there where he kind of carried the Seattle Mariners offensively. And for that, I will be eternally grateful because without 1995, for those too young to remember, without 95, we don't have Seattle Mariner baseball. So I hope it's not viewed as disrespect that I have Buhner 4th on this list because he's an awfully, awfully important part of the Seattle. So, spoiler, you know who number 3 is now. It's Mike Cameron. Offensively, really good player, really underrated player. 256, 350, 448, 798 OPS. I think it kind of underplays how good he was offensively, to be honest. A lot of strikeouts, 601 strikeouts in 610 games, but 87 homers and 106 stolen bases. I just don't think you can overstate how good Mike Cameron was defensively here for those 4 seasons as well. I think he's a better defensive player than number 2 and number 1 on this list, and that is high praise. Like Goody might be a little better at his best, but not by much. We were so blessed to have the run of center fielders we had, folks. It can't be overstated, the run of defensive players we had in center field. And Mike Cameron was a really good base runner, a really good defensive player, had plenty of pop in his bats, drove in a lot of runs, stole a lot of bases, and played unbelievable defense in the outfield too. I know it's only 4 seasons compared to Buhner being there for as long as he was, but I think the impact that Cameron made is just a little better. It's just a little better. Again, this is subjective, and it would probably be easier if Cameron would have spent another couple years in Seattle. And I also think the context here matters too, folks. The Mariners trade number 1 on this list to Cincinnati at a time where people forget that number 1 player said, "You can only trade me one place, and I'm not playing for anybody else." You heard that right, but he did that. And it was basically impossible for the Seattle Mariners to win that trade. And the reason they won that trade is a little bit because of the injuries that player number 1 had, but also because Mike Cameron was just a phenomenal, phenomenal player. One of the most underrated, if not the most underrated player in Seattle Mariner history. It's close. I've talked myself in and out of this a few times, by the way, of having Buhner at 3 and Cameron at 4. There's no doubt 3 and 4. They're the top 4. These guys are the top 4. No question about it. But just because of the defensive impact he made, the fact he was here for a couple of excellent Seattle Mariner teams. In fact, when Cameron leaves is when the downfall happens. 2000, the first year with him, they win that wild card and go to the ALCS. 2001, they win the 116 games and get to the ALCS. 2002 and 2003, they don't make the postseason, but they win 93 games, and a lot of it has to do with Mike Cameron. The strikeouts were frustrating. Jay Buhner struck out an awful lot too. And what Cameron provided defensively, it's why I put him at number 3. It's my list, and I can do whatever I want. Just kidding. I love you, Jay Buhner. I love you. So in that number 2 spot, of course, it's Willie Bloomquist. Just a ton of hustle and a lot of spark. Really don't. It's Ichiro. It's not even close. It's the most obvious 1-2 you could have. Maybe one of the most obvious 1-2s you can have in any franchise in terms of top at their position. I mean, what can you say about Ichiro? Let's just go over his hit totals for his first 9 seasons in the major leagues. 242, 208, 212, 262 major league record, 206, 224, 238, 213, 225, 214. While doing that, he provided at least 31 steals in every one of those seasons. 26 steals, and then 42 and 40 the next year. By the way, Ichiro in today's game steals 100 bases. Zero doubt in my mind. Beyond zero doubt in my mind. 100 bases. Ricky Henderson might steal 150, but Ichiro would steal 100 bases. Zero doubt. Less than zero doubt. How many times can I say zero doubt? There's zero doubt about the zero doubt that I have about zero doubt. It's crazy to think how many bases some of these guys would have stolen. And it's not because the players are slower now. On the contrary, it's the fact that these guys were so good at what they did and got on so much that they would just steal a ton of bases. I mean, 372 in that 2004 season. 350, 321, 312, 372, 303, 322, 351, 310, 352, 315. And then 2001 and 2011, 2012, things to start to slow down. And he gets traded to the Yankees fairly unceremoniously. But on top of being one of the best bat-to-ball hitters to ever play this game, and on top of being a fantastic base runner, he was an unreal defensive player with an absolute cannon for an arm. Absolute cannon. Just look at the highlights, folks. The greatest throw I have seen, at least in Mariner history, and one of the greatest throws of all time, if not the best, is that throw to get Terrence Long out. I've never seen a ball just on a line quite like that. It was a strike for well over 200 feet and probably would have kept going if David Bell's mitt wasn't in the way. And that's kind of when you knew we had something special here. And we talked about during the video about how we wasted Felix's career. It wasn't quite as bad for Ichiro because again, 2001, 2002, 2003, the Seattle Mariners are excellent. They are one of the, if not the best regular season team in baseball history in 2001. And then in 2002 and 2003, they're 93 wins. Yeah, they don't make the postseason, but the Mariners haven't reached that win total since. I think they might do it this year, by the way, but they haven't done it since. It's been 20 years. I mean, to stink in 2004 with Ichiro having that year with 262 hits, the most of any Major League Baseball player. And folks, I don't think that record's getting broken anytime soon. Amazing player. So fortunate that we got to watch him for as long as we did. It's kind of funny. I've seen some, and this is going to be a okay boomer type of thing, I guess. There's going to be some people who talk about like, I look at these numbers, and if you just take a look at Ichiro's career stats, you're not going to get it. Because you're going to look and you're going to see 311, 355, 402. Good. Really good. 3,089 hits. But they're so misleading based on him wanting to stick around and wanting to continue to play even when he was a shell of himself. I mean, from 2013 on, pulling up the numbers right now, he hit 261, 310, 329. And only one of those years was with the Seattle Mariners. But, you know, the years with the Marlins, the couple of years with the Yankees, and then the, you know, couple of cups of coffee with Seattle at the very end wasn't very good. He was a nice player to have because he was a nice little defensive replacement type, a fourth outfielder. You know, you can do worse. But he was a shell of the player that he was. And those stats just don't come close to indicating how good he was. And let's not forget about the unreal career he had in Japan as well. A lot of teams would have Ichiro as their greatest outfielder of all time. A lot of them would. And as while I complained about the depth on this thing, you can't do much better than this top two. Really special player. I mean, where do you start with Ken Griffey Jr.? I guess you start in 1989. It's kind of funny. I was looking back at those first couple of years, and I think I thought he was more of a power threat than he was. In 89, he hit 16 home runs as basically an 11-year-old. And, you know, that's good. 155 games the next year, he hits 22 homers. 1991, he hits 22 homers. 1992, he hits 27 homers. And, you know, he was much more, not about the average, but the hit tool was better than the power tool at that time. The power was, you know, pretty clearly going to come. But he has 300, 327, 308. And then 1993 happens. And folks, 1993 is when I really became a huge baseball fan. I had been to games like in the 80s, you know, here and there. I think I've told the story before, but the very first baseball game I went to, Ricky Henderson hits a leadoff home run. And I didn't get the rules. I didn't get why people weren't trying to get the baseball. Like, why aren't you getting it? He's just jogging. I'd like to say I've learned more, but that's subjective. But 1993 as a 10-year-old, 91, I fall in love with the game a little bit. That World Series between Atlanta and Minnesota was a big one for me. And then 92, a little bit. paying more attention, excited about the Kevin Mitchell trade, and then they end up just sucking out loud. But 93 is when Ken Griffey Jr. becomes one of, if not the best players in baseball. And from 93 to 1999, folks, 297, 387, 613, 311 homers, 107 stolen bases. As good as Julio is, as good as Felix was, as good as Randall K. Johnson was, no one's approaching that ever again in terms of dominance for the Seattle Mariners. And the crazy thing about that homer total is in 1995, he's limited to 72 games because he makes one of the greatest catches in Seattle Mariner history and breaks his wrist. That's easily his worst season as a Seattle Mariner after his rookie year. 258, 379, 481. Most people signing up for it. Not Griffey. 56 homers in 1997, 56 homers in 1998, 48 homers in 1999. And 48 honestly feels a little misleading. He just couldn't get the ball over the fence to end his time in Seattle. His defense was so spectacular, and the D-WAR stuff, like, he obviously ranks extremely high on that stuff. But I feel like it underrates how aesthetically pleasing it was to watch Griffey play center field. It was so graceful. He made it look so easy. I think sometimes people would accuse him of not hustling. And don't get me wrong, I do remember plenty of times where he could have gone to a commercial break and come back before Griffey got to first base if he hit that ground ball out. Never bothered me. It bothered a lot of people, a lot of boomers, I guess you would say. But he was just so graceful. He got to everything and he made it look so easy and he made it look so cool. Really should be doing just for this guy. This wasn't cool until Ken Griffey Jr. started doing it. Other people might have been doing it first. Other people might have been doing it in other areas until Ken Griffey Jr. showed up with his waggle and that backwards hat. It wasn't cool. At least not in my eyes. Those are the eyes that matter for this list, to be honest. And it hurt me. It hurt me really bad as a 16-year-old when this guy said he didn't want to be here anymore. And I remember skipping class, going into my car, checking out KJR, and listening to see if he'd gotten traded. And just praying that he didn't. And praying that he changed his mind. But he didn't. And that hurt. He had every right to do what he did, but it hurt. And when he came back the first time as a Red, and it was another, I talked about, I'm not going to do the crying thing today. I'm going to do my very best, even though I'm exhausted. This is my fourth show I've recorded today. When he came back and my dad and I got to go see that game, and they had the little thing before, and he told everybody that this place will always be home. Quickly forgot about all that. Quickly forgot about all of the trade stuff, and I think we all did. We forgave. I hope we do that with Alex Rodriguez someday too. I really do. It's a different situation, different length of time. but I hope we do. But quite simply, I don't know if anyone's ever going to pass Ken Griffey Jr. as the greatest Seattle Mariner of all time. Going by B-WAR, 96, 9.7 wins, 97, 9.1 wins, 93, 8.8 wins. And there's lots of 5s and 6s in between there too. And you just can't help but wonder, what if he stays in Seattle? And what if he stays healthy? Because being honest with you, the 284, 370, 538 with 630 home runs, if you would have told me that he'd be ending at after 1999, I'd be disappointed. It's a great career. It's one of the greatest careers of all time. But you can't help but wonder a little bit, what if? What if he stays here? And what if he stays healthy? So this is a long one. Apologize. I'm looking at my backwards hat right now and I feel ridiculous, but Griffey deserves it. Here's what I want you to do. I want you to hit like. I want you to hit subscribe. I want you to answer that question that I left in the middle of the video. And if you do that, when we get to 1,000 subscribers, and you also tell me who your favorite outfielder I didn't mention in the video is and why. When we get to 1,000 subscribers, and it's only like 100 more, less than that now. Somebody's winning that. That is an autographed Top Stadium Club Beam Team rookie card, numbered to 25. 25 out of 25. I must like you. Please hit like. Please hit subscribe. Follow me on that website at Crawford_MILB. Tell your friends. This was fun. I hit the wrong button, but this was fun.